Hello, Green Lake. How are you? I am Thomas Carr. I am a vertebrate paleontologist. I work at Carthage College down in Kenosha by the lake, and I run a paleo program there for undergraduate students that trains them to get into graduate school so they can be scientists and do great things in the world like Dr. Frederickson. I'm also here on Joseph's invitation to tell you a bit about T-Rex and where we're at with T-Rex in the 21st century. The reason why he's asked me to do that is because I studied T-Rex and all my career since 1999. And so I've seen one before, so I can tell you what they look like, and maybe a bit more. This is a family portrait done by a very interesting Canadian painter named Dale McInnes. And it shows T-Rex. It's the big one in the back, and its color pattern is based on the Bengal tiger, which is the largest, one of the largest mammalian predators alive today, at least among the cats. This one that's based on African lion is the closest relative of T-Rex. That's Tyrannosaurus batar, and it lived in Asia, in what's now Mongolia. This is a close relative of theirs, the Spletosaurus. I think it's based on the spectacled bear. I think that's a spectacled bear. If any of you know bears better than me, I'll bear with you for a correction. I think that's what that color pattern is based on. These are a couple weirdos. This is the Albertosaurus. I think that's Libratus, and that's Sarcophagus, based on normal and melanistic jaguars, although I suspect that one's really a leopard. And then we have this very elegant Tyrannosaur over here called Ailuranus. And it just occurs to me now that I've published on all these Tyrannosaurs. So this is sort of a nice family portrait, and it reflects my career in a completely unintentional way. But I'm here to tell you about T-Rex in particular, because T-Rex is the most extreme of this group of animals. So this drawing is not an exaggeration. It's truly the biggest of the lot, and unfortunately it was the last. The T-Rex was found, the first one was found in 1902 in Montana by a field crew from the American Museum in New York, in a place called Hell Creek. And the place is really called that. It's a natural creek called Hell Creek, because it's hot there in the summer. And it's right about here. If you've ever been to eastern Montana, visited the Fort Peck Reservoir, which is human-made, the Hell Creek is still there. And that's where T-Rex was found in 1902, the first specimen. So there's quite a few T-Rexes we know about, but the first one was found in that year. And this is the quarry. So just a bit about the discovery of T-Rex. The crew arrived at Hell Creek and set up camp. And Barnum Brown, who was the expedition leader, went for a walk. I don't know if he wanted to, have a pee somewhere or something, but in 10 minutes, he found the first T-Rex ever. And I've been collecting in the Hell Creek Formation of Montana since 2006, and I've never found a T-Rex within 10 minutes of showing up. What we're looking at is the hip. So this is the hip. That's the hip socket, right about there. This is the front. This is the back. And the hip is made of 3 bones. There's one on top, so we're looking at the top edge. That would be the top edge of the back. There's a bone sticking down and forward, and it has this boot on it, and T-Rex would have rested on that boot when it sat down. There's another bone sticking out, down and back, and behind that is the tail going off to the right. So the T-Rex was just lying there. When it died, it lay down on its side. We don't know if it actually lay down and then died, but the body was laying down. And here's the back, curving off to the left, and we're getting into the neck here. And the skull wasn't complete. There's a few bones of the skull. But this is a truly remarkable discovery. And in the back here, yeah, it's that exciting. And in the back, yeah, that's the back of the quarry. So they had to dig out all this rock. So imagine, fill all this in with rock in your imagination. And that's what they had to clear out using picks and shovels and junk, which is what we do today. The techniques have not changed. So after the first T-Rex was found, it was published on by a scientist named Osborne, and this was his concept of it back in 1905. That's the year T-Rex was named. And Tyrannosaurus Rex means, you know, tyrant lizard king, because it was really big, mostly. And this diagram shows that we have part of the jaws and the face, some of the vertebrae, parts of the hip bones. So whatever is dark here is what was actually prepped out in the lab. And then back in 1906, just a year later, Osborne published the complete diagram of the skeleton. So we've got, there's the whole hip that we saw in the picture, and there's the backbone and neck, partial skull, and it turns out it had complete legs too that aren't in the picture. And there's a bit of tail, so it looks like the tail wasn't completely prepped at that time. A couple years later, the American Museum found a second T-Rex, a really nice one. It's the famous one that's on display in the gallery. And we can see as we move through time from 1905 to 1906 to 1916, the concept of T-Rex changed. So this one is sort of standing up and dragging his tail. This one hasn't changed much. This one is still dragging its tail, but it's more active looking. And it has a complete skull, a perfect skull. So we had this vision of T-Rex. This is the one that I grew up with when I was, you know, two years old and stuff, in that age. And then in the 80s, everything changed. We had new ideas about dinosaurs. And this concept of T-Rex's posture and appearance is pretty much unchanged, except for the wrist. This is back in 1988. Dinosaurs can't bend like that. They're more or less held like this, the hands face in toward each other, and the wrists are kind of stiff, unless, of course, you're a birdline dinosaur like Deinonychus in the corner there. The T-Rex lived a long time ago, and this is a time scale. This is a geologic time scale, and these numbers represent millions of years ago. So this starts at 145 to 66, and 66 is an important number because that's the end of the age of dinosaurs, but it's the road toward us and our civilization and consciousness and all that sort of thing. At 66 million years ago, there's that mass extinction event that killed off all the dinosaurs and marine reptiles and many other organisms. 70% of life on Earth was destroyed. Basically, Earth was nuked from the heavens, and it set the stage for our ultimate appearance. But the slice of time that T-Rex lived in, it's called the, I think I accidentally turned this off in my excitement to tell you about the end of life.
There you go.
Hey, is it working? There it is. Okay, thank you. Each day I find a new way of discovering how dumb I am. So there we go. That's the second for me. I actually drove past Green Lake on my first jaunt out here and I had to like drive back on the way down the road. Anyhow, so the T-Rex lived in this time slice called the Maastrichtian, and T-Rex probably showed up closer to 66 million years ago than 72. This is the Cretaceous. This is the time of the advanced dinosaurs when they were stomping around the Earth globally. It's also a time after the continents started rifting apart, so we started seeing faunas with really distinct animals like Triceratops and T-Rex. So T-Rex was amazing in the true sense of the word. It doesn't make much sense compared to its closest relatives. It's huge. Earlier Tyrannosaurs, its closest relatives, were not this big. T-Rex was basically about 12 meters long, about 39, 40 feet. So that's, you know, average sized adult T-Rex. At the hips, T-Rex was over 12 feet tall. There's a funny story. So this is a photograph of the gallery of the Dinosaur Discovery Museum in Kenosha. We have the largest display of theropod dinosaurs, meat eaters. In North America, we have more than New York does. So when this thing was being mounted, it was on its side, had to be lifted up. And so there was a person pushing up on the hips to help get it up. There are people with ropes on the other side. And the people with the ropes finally gained traction, and they lifted up the T-Rex, but also the person with it. There's somebody hanging off the top of the T-Rex for a frenzied second or two. I wasn't there to see it. I mean, it would have been great fun to see. T-Rex was really heavy, 9 or 10 tons, whether you go metric or imperial. That is as much as an adult African elephant. That's as much as a large ship anchor, 10 tons, that's how much they weigh. A small jet, it's a small fighter jet, weighs about 10 tons, and it's also the mass of a light tank. T-Rex is just off the scales in terms of size and mass. It's a truly extraordinary animal of its lineage. It's not typical, it is strange and grand. And given its size, and given that it's a predatory dinosaur, a meat eater, everything was on the menu. So where I dig in the Hell Creek of Montana, in the Hell Creek Formation, not at the Hell Creek or south of there, this is the sort of animals that were on the menu. So little plant-eating dinosaurs like Leptoceratops. And there's a relative of Leptoceratops in the back. There's a beautiful Castus Tachysaurus, which is a Chinese Mongolian relative, smaller than Lepto, but gives you the right idea. This is Thescelosaurus. This is a duck-billed line, iguanodon line, plant-eating dinosaur. We find lots of these. It's probably one of the most common dinosaurs next to Triceratops that we find. In the Hell Creek, there are also giant duckbills like Edmontosaurus, giant Ankylosaurids like Ankylosaurus itself. Now, I may love T-Rex, but when I'm out in the Badlands, I want to find an Ankylosaurus. They are stupendously baroque, rococo, gorgeous animals. Their skulls are this wide. They're huge. They're strange, like T-Rex in some ways. And all we find are little scraps of armor. It drives me crazy. And I just, like, why can't we find a skull, like right here? Why not one right there? Or why not a tail club? These tail clubs are nearly solid bone, and we should be finding them all over the place. We don't. We've never found a tail club, which tells me that Ankylosaurus is probably living either close to the coast or it's up in the mountains. It's a rare animal. It's not part of the typical fauna. We also have these pear-headed, pear-shaped headed, clubless Ankylosaurians called Nodosaurids. And we find scraps of their armor too, but nothing spectacular, nothing beyond that yet. In terms of small-eating dinosaurs, T-Rex would have eaten small meat eaters. There's no reason not to. They're small and crunchy and nutritious. They include things like the Troodontids, which are bird-line meat eaters. The ostrich-mimic dinosaurs, which are amazingly ostrich-like. Yet there are fossils from Alberta that show that these animals, like ostriches, have long feathers extending from the arms, just like an ostrich. Like, who knew? How could you possibly know? But they did. It's an example of something called convergent evolution, but they would have been eaten as well. Really long legs, so probably one of the young T-Rexes would have caught them because they have long legs like ostrich dinosaurs. We also have, we find teeth of and toe bones of raptors, so they're technically called dromaeosaurids. We've got one, so there's one called Carr raptor, and then we've got the oviraptors like Anzu that would have been on the menu too. The T-Rex would have eaten everything. When they were younger, I bet they would have eaten insects and lizards and snakes and mammals. Just as animals grow up, predatory animals, as they grow up, they just eat progressively bigger things. And so this is what the adults would be eating. Juveniles would be eating these, and these would have been for juveniles too, but the adults would have snapped them up as well. The T-Rex is only known currently from the American West, and so we have them from Saskatchewan and Alberta south to Texas. But at the time T-Rex arrived in North America, The west was an island continent called Laramidia that extended from what's now Alaska all the way down to Mexico and beyond. North America was sliced in two at that time by a seaway, and toward the end of the age of dinosaurs, that seaway started to regress or pull off the land. And so the west and east were joined. During the late Cretaceous, the east was called Appalachia. It was a separate subcontinent with its own dinosaurs evolving. But they did rejoin right before the extinction. So it's possible T-Rex may have wandered into Appalachia and things like Cryptosaurus might have come into Laramidia, but we don't have any evidence of that. The possibility is there. Regardless, the point is that T-Rex is from Laramidia and Laramidia only, and that raises the question, where on earth did it come from? Because before that time, none of its close Tyrannosaur relatives were in Laramidia. They're distant relatives. The close relatives were over here in Asia. Next. Okay. This is T-Rex's closest relative, Tyrannosaurus batar. It's from Mongolia, and it lived probably before T-Rex. We don't have really good ages for the rocks over here. But the point is that the sea, globally, the sea was up and down like a toilet seat. It would rise up and would go down, rise up and would go down. And when it would go down, land masses would join up. They'd make land bridges. So you've all heard of Pharyngea and like Asian mammals coming over here during the ice ages and things going into Asia from here. Same thing with dinosaurs. So T-Rex's closest relative is Asian, and at the time of T-Rex, right before T-Rex, sea waves were low. That's what this blue curve is. This is the sea wave going down and up, down and up, and up. So I told you, it's just like a toilet seat, up and down, up and down, up and down, and really, really low down. And I bet that's when the land bridge was, and T-Rex came over from Asia. So T-Rex probably didn't even evolve here in North America. It evolved in Asia and just walked over when it could because it was following the food. What do we know about T-Rex's life cycle? We've learned a lot. We've learned that we can identify females. This is a chunk of a thigh bone of a female T-Rex. This is the inside of the thigh bone, nice and smooth bone, but then there's all this gnarly stuff right here. And that is probably something called medullary bone that modern birds have. And mummy birds will sequester or store bone in their long bones, and this spongy bone is used to shell the eggs. Right? She can't strip it from her skeleton or she's going to be in trouble with osteoporosis and stuff like that. And so it looks like dinosaurs did the same thing. Now, that hypothesis, I warn you, is not universally accepted. It has been challenged. But maybe this is what this crunchy stuff is. And so we think we can identify female dinosaurs, including T-Rex. We have a lot of fossils of T-Rex, mostly adults. This is a growth curve. This is young animals going through a growth spurt. There's a couple of females with medullary bone. There's PD from the Burpee Museum, which is in Rockford. You should go visit. It's fantastic. This is B-Rex, which is this one. You can go see this one at the Museum of the Rockies in Bozeman. And then we've got growth curve leveling out among adults, so things like the New York skull. Speaking of the Burpee, this young animal here that's Jane. And this is the infamous Cleveland skull, which we'll get back to. The bottom line is that we know a fair amount about T-Rex biology, that we can put together diagrams like this to give us a snapshot of how these animals lived. Here's something that is kind of interesting. T-Rex had a fairly short lifespan as far as we know. Had the lifespan of somebody living in medieval Europe, 32. Actually, the maximum age for T-Rex, which is based on Sue, the maximum age there is 31. And Sue, in my work, is this one right here, which is the oldest T-Rex as far as we know right now. So T-Rex had short arms. All Tyrannosaurs had short arms. So if you blink, you'll miss it. There's an arm there, and there's another arm there. There's that little arm. This diagram, these models were made by Osborne's technicians in New York. This was published in 1913. It's a lovely diorama. This is what the display was supposed to look like. And they didn't have, I guess, enough money to do this, but it should have looked like this, and it would have been amazing. So we've got a kill. So there's a dinosaur carcass, probably Triceratops down here. We've got a T-Rex that is eating it and doesn't want to share with its friend. That's not nice. You're supposed to share, right? These animals are stupid and hungry, and that's a combination for not sharing. But anyway, if you take a look at the hand, this is in the days before we knew that Tyrannosaurs had 2 fingers. So there's 1 finger, 2 fingers, three fingers. That's based on other meat eaters like Allosaurus that have 3 hands. We didn't know about the 2-hand thing until 1917. The Canadian Tyrannosaurus, Albertosaurus oberus, was found. Anyway, why such short arms? It's something that, a question that has captivated some paleontologists. It doesn't really interest me much. I don't think it's that important. But the latest interesting idea is that it's thought that the arms were short so that these animals could feed together without biting each other's arms off and bleeding to death. And that's actually does make sense. Alligators and crocodiles do eat together, and it's a messy affair. They do accidentally bite each other and actually rip each other's arms off on occasion. So it's not the worst idea. What do we know about T-Rex behavior? We have trackways of Tyrannosaurus. This is a diagram that shows 1, 2, and 3 Tyrannosaurs walking together, or we don't know if they're walking together, but the tracks are going in the same direction, right? It's the same basic angle as well. Tyrannosaurs, like all dinosaurs, are evolved from common ancestor shared with birds and crocodiles. Birds and crocodiles are social animals. They group together. They may not be besties, but they do tend to form groups. And so we should expect dinosaurs to move together as well. It's just inheritance of their behavior. So we have the trackways that are consistent with that. Tyrannosaurs were pretty smart for a reptile. We actually can estimate the size of their brains. It turns out that they have brain sizes comparable to crocodilians, which is smart for a reptile, but really, really dumb for a mammal. So when I think of Tyrannosaurs, I use living crocodilians as my model for their behavior because they have the same brain power. They're not that smart, but they're smart enough to do interesting things. Next. What do we know about the teeth? All right, so the teeth are conical. So this is actually a photograph of the New York skull of the front end of its snout. So we're looking at teeth. The teeth are neat. So if you rub your tongue against your front teeth are flat. They're called incisors, and they're shaped like chisels to like crop food, so you can like eat a corn on the cob easily with incisors. Most mammals have incisors. They're shaped like little shovels for cropping food. Guess what? Tyrannosaurs have incisors too. So the first 8 teeth across the front are all incisors. And so in the picture, we're seeing those incisors from the side. Then behind that, we've got these railway spikes. The teeth are like cones. They're basically like the fangs of mammals. So if you have a dog or a cat, you know that you've got the fangs. You know, the 4 up front, there's 2 up top, and there's also lower ones. What's really cool is back here we have the cast of the T-Rex tooth. And you can appreciate the shape. So this is the part that bites right here. That's the crown, it's called. The rest of it, everything below my thumb, that's called the root. That's what's implanted in the jaw, so you never see that. So I want you to take a look at the working part of the tooth and see that it's back. It's not a perfect cone. It's not a perfect cone like your dog or cat, but it's getting there. And what that means is a really strong structure that can be jammed through and splinter bones. So take a look at that. Pass along to your friends. Remember, share. It'll be like a T-Rex, don't share. But take a look, yeah, take a look. And also, there's one other thing I want you to see. So there's a little ridge along the back. There's a little ridge up front. If you feel that, it's bumpy. Feel that ridge right there. See that? But that's bumpy. And those are the little denticles, little Steak knife, denticles, which means little teeth. They help give the tooth some grip when it bites in the flesh. It doesn't cut. Tyrannosaur teeth are not sharp. They're as sharp as a dull, smooth blade, meaning a butter knife without serrations. This has been shown empirically. So we've got a really nice model of a tooth. And the bottom line is that if you're bitten by a T-Rex, you're going to explode. Their bite forces are incredibly high, and just in simple terms, if one bit you, it would be like having a small car dropped on you. That's the lower end of the scale, or at the maximum end, the equivalent of having a blue whale dropped on you. Either way, tyrannosaurs are up to the job of biting through bone, and they have to. They've got those crafty little arms with little hands that can't do anything, and so they grab their prey and they process it partly just through biting and crushing their prey and then swallowing it whole like a giant crocodile. So how fast and slow is T-Rex? Here's another Dale McInnes painting. This is a pair of Albertosaurus, or maybe young Daspletosaurus, harassing a horned dinosaur. I really like Dale's style. The animals are really unique looking. They've got the tiger stripes happening again. All right, so how fast was T-Rex really? Joseph did get to this earlier. In terms of running, they could run fast, but when they did run, it was somewhere between 11 and 25 miles per hour. And I want to put that into perspective. 11 miles per hour doesn't sound like much, does it? But guess what the average running speed for people are? The average running speed for men is 8 miles per hour. So gentlemen, you're not getting away. T-Rex is coming at you, I'm sorry to say. It's worse for women, unfortunately. The average running speed of women is 6.5 miles per hour. So even when a T-Rex, if T-Rex could only run that fast, we're not getting away. Now the fastest human speed ever clocked is almost 28 miles per hour. That was done by the 100-meter dash sprinter Usain Bolt, who's trained for that. So Usain Bolt is barely getting away from T-Rex if T-Rex could move at 25, but not for long. In terms of walking speed, T-Rex modeling shows it would have walked around 3 miles per hour, and so we could have outwalked barely a walking T-Rex, and given their size, it would have overtaken us anyway. So a person could outwalk but not outrun T-Rex. And by the way, these animals, despite their size and mass, they're quite agile and could rapidly turn. So if you think you could, confuse one by running around its feet, it would just, turn its head and snap you up. They can turn very quickly. They're ballerinas of the dinosaur world. Many pictures of T-Rex these days show T-Rex having feathers, and it is true that close relatives of T-Rex did have feathers. Things like Utyrannus, Dilong, and Guanlong did have feathers, but the advanced tyrannosaurs did not. They were big and they had scales, and how do we know? We have the skin patches from the neck, we have skin patches from the hips, and we have skin patches from the tail. We actually have skin impression of the soles of the feet too. And T-Rex had scales, not feathers. And actually, when dinosaurs get big, they tend to get rid of the feathers. Here's something about feathers. Feathers evolved in the common ancestor of dinosaurs and pterosaurs, the flying reptiles. And as various dinosaurs got big, they lost the feathers for scales. Because feathers are scales. They're actually a special hollow filament scale. And they just have to tweak development and to turn a flat scale into a feather, but you can't turn a feather back into a scale developmentally. Anyway, there's the scales. There's the evidence there. No feathers for T-Rex. The T-Rex have lips. I did often pictures of dinosaurs, showed dinosaurs with lips, and we can test that by looking at the texture of the bones of tyrannosaurs like the Spinosaurus and T-Rex. See how gnarly and rough it is? And we can compare that to living relatives like alligators that have this exact same texture. And that tells us that this texture, which goes all the way down to where the teeth are, shows that the face was covered in flat scales like this. And they also have patches of armor-like skin on the front and top of their snouts, on their cheeks, and on top of their horny horns, up in front of their eyes, and also a patch of fingernail, basically keratin it's called, behind the eye. And we also have evidence for the flat scales on the front of lower jaws and a patch of armor-like skin where they'd be plunging the front of their chin into a carcass and being scraped by bone. They have to shield themselves from that. This is a digital model that I'm working on with Jagged Fang Productions. James. This shows you what the face of a young T-Rex would look like. There's the flat scales, armor-like skin, the flat scales on lower jaws, and the lipless mouth. So they're a lot more like crocodilians than people realize. What do T-Rex sound like? Well, we just don't know. I've never heard one say anything. They just lie there on the table, really quiet. And it's a reasonable question to ask, but we do know that T-Rex could hear low-frequency sounds. We know that duck-billed dinosaurs probably made low-frequency sounds. But to answer this question, we have to model a lot of anatomy digitally to get some sense of what it would have sounded like. And that would require just a lot of very sophisticated work. It is thought that they probably did something like an open mouth vocalization like birds. This would be high energy and would be in circumstances of begging and aggression. Just look at this one. This one's yelling at that one. And that one's saying, "Don't yell at me. It doesn't have to be so loud. But I'm still hungry." There's that carcass again. Birds also do these closed mouth vocalizations for reproduction and display, mating. Juveniles do these closed mouth calls. They're low frequency, and they're also involved in territorial calls. So these types of vocalizations were within reach of dinosaurs. We just don't really know what they actually sound like. We have to model the soft anatomy, which we just don't have, but who knows? There has been a controversy about a tyrannosaur called Nanotyrannus. This is the skull on which that animal is based, which is at the Cleveland Museum. You can go see it there. And back when it was found in 1942, it was thought to be a small adult tyrannosaur. It is not. It has all the features of a juvenile tyrannosaur. That you can look at any tyrannosaur in the face, if they look like that, it's a juvenile. Beyond the small size. Has like big round eyes, a long, low snout, narrow teeth, not the thicker teeth like the one that's going around. And it turns out that this skull is of a fairly young animal. This diagram is a growth series of T-Rex, so we're starting with the youngest ones here. And there's Sue right there. That's the New York skull, which is about middle-aged. And the Cleveland skull is one of the youngest juveniles that we have. And there's Jane. Jane's a bit more mature. It's a little bit later along in the growth series. So Nanotyrannus is fiction, because all the evidence points to the fact that it's a juvenile animal. Next. Recently, there's a publication that split T-Rex into 3 species. Including T-Rex. So these two are apparently T-Rex. This is the type. This is the one that was found in 1902. There's this other one named T. imperator, and that's Sue right there, and that's the Wankel Rex, which is now at Smithsonian. And this third one, T. regina, queen, Tyrannosaurus queen, that is Stan, I think. And they don't know what the New York skeleton is. So the bottom line is no, T-Rex really isn't 3 species. In fact, this study cannot tell the three species apart if you read it closely. They use the same two features to distinguish them, and all the differences actually overlap with each other. So it's kind of crazy stuff, but we won't be stuck with it for long, I promise you. Thanks. There's also another controversy over T-Rex. Was it a scavenger or a hunter? Basically, we can tackle this in two ways. T-Rex is a member of a group of dinosaurs that are predators. There's no question that the other tyrannosaur species hunted and killed animals. You know, the anatomy shows that, and T-Rex is no different. And so in science, when there's no difference, that's called the null. So T-Rex is anatomically different to indicate that it's not hunting its prey. So we also know that in modern ecosystems, that animals that hunt will also eat dead carcasses. So for example, you know, a big crocodile will kill a zebra, drown it, and other crocodiles will come up and start ripping it apart. So the T-Rex probably did the same thing. It probably killed prey and also ate things that other animals already killed. So this is a sort of false controversy. But the main point here is that those who insist on the scavenging hypothesis, it's a hard hypothesis, meaning that T-Rex did not hunt. And so that's what I'm tackling here. Ancestrally, T-Rex was a hunter, and there's no reason to think it wouldn't scavenge, and I wouldn't think any other meat eater wouldn't scavenge either. Next. So, there's a full plate of T-Rex. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them for you. Thank you so much.
Does anyone have any questions for Dr. Thomas Carr? I can walk around with Mike.
What about Sue from like the Field Museum?
Yes. What about Sue from the Field Museum? Sue is one of the biggest, most complete T-Rexes that we have. It's about 31 years old, maximum at least 28 to 31 years old. I studied Sue firsthand. They opened that bulletproof case for me when I was doing my PhD. Sue is actually sort of, now this isn't a kick in the teeth of the Field Museum. It's an institution that I know and love and respect very much. But Sue's skull isn't the best preserved of the T-Rex. It's actually quite crushed from top to bottom. It has that sort of that big dent in it. And so it's not a perfect skull, but it is a complete skull, which makes it scientifically important, even though it's a little bit damaged. One of the best skulls of T-Rex is in New York. That one is almost completely undistorted. It's a little bit sheared, but it's in better shape than Sue. But Sue is still a Rex to be proud of.
Any other questions for Dr. Thomas Carr?
Do you think that, like, with age, they would, like, do you think that juveniles would have feathers in tyrannosaurs, or do you think that throughout its lifespan it would fully scale?
Right, so the question is, would the juveniles have feathers? So I did imply the answer, and that is no. The reason for this is that as far as I know, there is no precedent among living birds where there's a developmental switch from feathers to scales. Now, if we saw that in the wild, in any bird species, then I'd say, okay, all right, it can happen. But as far as I know, there's never a switch developmentally from feathers to scales. The thing that produces feathers always produces feathers throughout the animal's lifetime. That's from natal down to like remiges or whatever. And with the scales, same thing. They're just producing scales. It's always scales throughout their lifetime. And there are like developmental quirky things where you get like feathers on the tips of scales. That's people messing with the program. So the reasonable hypothesis is that there was scales all the way to the egg. And if that were not true, then we'd see things like feathers on those impressions. It wouldn't be scales, it'd be these long tubular things. We don't see that. What we see are these little pebble-like scales. And what's really kind of neat about them is that Tyrannosaurus scales are like dinosaur scales, like they're round and in rosettes. They're small, they're tiny. And so I imagine that a Tyrannosaur that's just done a dust bath and scraped off that top layer of skin in the sun would have stood up and would have glistened like velvet. I'm sure they're beautiful animals to behold, and the scales would have been a big part of that.
Any other final questions?
In prehistoric Earth, they talk about Tyrannosaurus rex, I think, essentially I could be wrong, but having ability to do display with their arms, their small arms. Is that, what do you think of that?
Yeah, so that's in prehistoric planet, right? With the Carnotaurus doing it. Yeah, it was still, like, the basic idea is there. What's up with the small arms? Where are you doing with the small arms? What are you doing with it? And so in prehistoric planet, they show Carnotaurus males flashing color on their arms, but these are vestigial structures that really aren't doing anything. And in the meantime, Carnotaurus has these huge honking horns sticking out over its head. That's where the displays are. That's where all the action is. That's where all that nonverbal communication or symbolic communication is going on. And same thing with Tyrannosaurs. The heads are like signal platforms. Every sort of bump and horn actually means something. They could read each other and understand what a horn shape would be. It'd be automatic. We have to do all the hard work of figuring all that out. But waving it around the little arms, I think this reflects the latest interesting notion of the main person, the main scientific consultant. There's no evidence for that. That's not in the literature, and it doesn't make much sense. Actually have such a trivial structure be such an important display. It sort of runs against our understanding of small structures like that. They're just luggage, they're along for the ride.
Any other final questions? I'm running.
So, all these dinosaur names, who gets to name them? The discoverer of the dinosaur, or just you all get together and when you find a new species and come up with the name? I've always found that fascinating, where who decides? They don't name themselves, so.
No, they don't. It depends. So it's usually the scientist so when a new dinosaur is found, it is prepared in a museum, so removed from the rock, and then a scientist writes something called a description. A description is turning the skeleton into words so it can be understood by other scientists, what makes it unique. It's usually the scientist that does that job who names it. But I've named several Tyrannosaurs, and so with Tratophonius currii, who's a Utah Tyrannosaur, and when I was a graduate student, a fellow graduate student said, "Hey Thomas, I have this great name for a predatory dinosaur. No one's used it. Do you want the name?" Tratophonius, it means monstrous murderer. I said, okay. And then a few months later, I turned out to be writing up this new Tyrannosaur, and then Tratophonius was the name of that one. Wrote another Tyrannosaur from New Mexico called Distachia. So my co-author, we wanted to acknowledge Native Americans, was found on Navajo land. And so Tom found out the name of the area in Navajo, Distachia Wilderness Region, so it's Distachia. So Distachia for the region, place of the mud formations, and then Everser is Greek or Latin for destroyer. And then another one, Displeosaurus horneri. Displeosaurus isn't a name, it means like fearful lizard or frightful lizard. But horneri was suggested, it was named for Jack Horner, who was a consultant on Jurassic Park and Jurassic World. And so my co-author suggested that we name it after Jack, which I like. So, you know, it's not always the lead author, and it's sometimes, more than one person can contribute to the name if they're on the project.
Thanks. Any other final questions? Awesome. Let's give Dr. Thomas Carr one more big round of applause.